things off. So as many of you know, my name is Fintan Murphy. I'm CEO of Damson Cloud and the host generally of our webinars. I know we have a good few people who are our webinar regulars, so appreciate you guys continuing to log on. And this morning we have Isobel Phillips from Educative.
Hi everyone. Good morning. Thanks, Finn, for inviting me along.
No worries, Izzy, and thanks for coming along. Izzy's going to talk a little bit about exactly what is change management, just to kind of set the scene for us a little bit. And then both of us are going to go into Google's detailed Google Apps methodology. And then afterwards, we're going to leave you guys with some resources. So there's some fantastic resources out there, both Google related resources and from other companies that you can use in your change management. And then finally, we're going to do some Q&A and discussion at the end. So a little bit about Damson Cloud. As many of you know, we're a Google Apps for Work Premier partner. We have offices in Dublin, London, and an offshore development team in India, which many of you have worked with. What we've seen in terms of our own customers' transition over the last few years is moving from that technological transformation where you essentially had a hardware or infrastructure upgrade that was required, moving into more of the business and cultural transformation. And certainly what we're talking about today in terms of change management really fits within that business and cultural transformation, particularly the cultural, and we're going to touch on that later on. And the big thing that I always say to all of you, all of our customers out there, is that really we're here to help. So I'm going to hand over to Izzy now. She's just going to do a little introduction about Educative.
So hi everyone. So my name's Isobel, or Izzy. My background's in psychology and education, and I've spent my career in training, content development, and change management. So through Educative, we provide change management, supporting organisations through a change process, be that implementing new policies and procedures or moving IT systems to Google Apps, for example. For training, we design and deliver training in Google Apps, facilitation, leadership, and 21st century skills, which are things like communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. And then content development as well. That's things like writing training manuals, reports, and guidelines. Things like we can put together weekly tips and tricks emails for you to send out within your organisation as well. We specialise in taking detailed and complicated information and making it really straightforward and accessible for the user. And of course, we work with Damson Cloud. So thank you very much, Fintan, for inviting me to take part in this webinar with you. So what's change management? Well, it's a systematic approach to dealing with change, both from the perspective of the organisation and the individual. So it can sometimes seem overwhelming for an organisation if you're faced with perhaps some maybe stubborn individuals and a big change to implement. Or it could seem really simple. I mean, you just tell people what's happening and they have to do it, right? I think the reality is somewhere in the middle of the two of them. So John Kotter is a former Harvard Business School professor, and he's an expert in change and leadership. And this is his 8-step process for leading change. So the first step is to find an opportunity to make the change exciting. And then you need your stakeholders. And these are the people who have the power and energy to lead and support the change. With them, you can then develop a plan for how you'll implement the change. And you're going to need manpower to make this happen. So people who are ready, willing, and able to drive the change. Try to remove as many barriers as possible and address any challenges before they happen. A really important step is to create short-term wins. So celebrate things, draw attention to them, and that will help with the perception of the change being positive. And we'll mention short-term wins again later. That helps build momentum, and you can keep on building that. So recognize and reward the desired behaviours. Use the momentum that you have to implement more of your desired changes. And if you need to, bring in new volunteers, themes, and projects to sustain the acceleration. And then finally, make sure to articulate the successes. Make the connections clear between the new behaviour and the successes, so you can see the successful change. Another model of change management is from Darrell Connor. He's a leader in organisational change and an expert on the psychology of change. And he outlines 8 stages that people move through to become committed to the new change. And identifying the stage that people are at determines the support that needs to be provided to move them up onto the next stage. So there's 3 distinct phases here, and we're going from the bottom up. So we start with preparation, then acceptance, and finally commitment to the change. So starting at the bottom, we begin with contact to let people know about the upcoming change. And this should hopefully lead to awareness of the change, but you can't assume that. It's not always enough to just tell someone that something's going to happen. Awareness of the change should be followed by understanding why it's happening, what the benefits are. And if this isn't implemented effectively, it can lead to confusion, and that'll hamper a successful change process. So communication is really important. Understanding the impact of the change allows individuals to decide on a positive or negative perception of the change. And obviously here the goal is for a positive perception. So again, effective communication is so important.
Definitely aiming for positive.
So just if we just pop back to Connor's stages there, Fenton.
Apologies.
Thanks. The move up to experimentation then marks the crossing of the action threshold, what Connor calls the action threshold, into the commitment phase. And in order for experimentation and finally adoption to happen, people need to have the skills, time, resources and capacity to make change happen. And this is something that organisations sometimes maybe forget about. So failing to plan for this and to allow training and support to happen, to ensure that people have the resources that they need and also the time and capacity and capabilities to give the change, it's a huge stumbling block, and it's really important that that's given time and space. Institutionalization simply means that the new way of working has become accepted as the standard operating procedure for the organisation. And that might be enough for some organisations to consider the change successful, but ideally the new methods will become internalised by the people working there. And that'll just become the way that people automatically work and are most comfortable with. Okay. So why is change management important? Well, happier employees who are comfortable with the ways that you work are more productive, and it makes for a much nicer environment for everyone. But aside from happier employees, there's monetary value as well. So projects with excellent change management programs are 6 times more likely to meet or exceed their objectives. Companies with high effectiveness in change management are 3.5 times more likely to financially outperform their industry peers. And overall, the return on investment of an initiative is 143% when there's excellent change support. So from a financial perspective, it's definitely something worth investing in. So how does this apply to Google Apps? Well, Google's deployment methodology allocates 30% of time and resources to the overall project management activities, 30% to the technical configuration, and then 40% to change management. So Google see this as an essential part of the deployment process. So Google used a simple 4-step methodology for change management, and Vincent and I are going to run through each of these steps in more detail. But to give a quick summary, underlying the whole change process is sponsorship. It's really important. This is followed and built upon by transformation and organisational analysis, and then communications and finally training are added to the process. And if you think back to Kotter's 8 steps and Connor's stages of commitment to change, you can see the basis for this 4-step process and the importance of it for successful implementation of Google Apps.
That's a great introduction, Isobel. Really appreciate that. So I'm going to be covering executive sponsorship and stakeholders. And I think the big thing a lot of people say to me is like, who exactly is a stakeholder? And I think it's really important to define who a stakeholder is. And it's essentially anyone in the organization who is affected by the change in any way. And so it's really important to define exactly what your who your stakeholders are and what exactly your case for change is. And then moving on from that, getting executive sponsorship early on in the process, and very often for us, it's actually within the sales process that we're ensuring that there is executive sponsorship within the organization. As Isobel said, in order for the project to be successful, as we saw in the previous slide, change management is actually one of, if not the most important part. And so building an executive roadmap and an executive committee roadmap is really, really important. Making sure that you get buy-in from the leadership and also from the middle management. I know very often organizations can maybe forget about the middle management. For example, in a retail scenario, making sure that you have the store managers in each of the store locations on board, as well as the executive team and head office, and just making sure that all of your stakeholders involved in the organization are brought into the fold. So, and as Isobel said, are communicated to and brought along that change journey as well. And then next we have a program that Google called Google Guides, and Google recommend at least 5 or 10% of the organization is trained up to this level. You may have a higher percentage in a smaller organization because it may be easier to do. In a large organization, you would want a spread of Google Guides across the organization. So, for example, if you were in different locations or countries, you would want people in each of those locations. Or perhaps you might want people in different departments. So someone within the marketing department, the accounts department, sales department, and so on. In terms of the go live day, which is what Google call, the day that all of your users go live onto the system, it's recommended that your Google Guides are very visible within the organization. In a small organization, that might just be identifying them by letting people know who they are. And in a large organization, customers have done things like had the Google Guides wear Google t-shirts, or a t-shirt that they've maybe had printed with your logo and Google's logo, so that people are aware who the Google Guides are. And then finally, just bringing the executive sponsorship and that team that are bringing the Google project in, to think about the idea of an innovation council or an innovation committee, because Google Apps is a very innovative product, and Isobel's going to be touching on this later on around transformation in an organization. And the people who are involved in the Google Apps project are probably or potentially the ones that are going to be involved in that innovation committee. And very often Google Apps is part of a larger innovation drive within the organization. I'm going to hand back over to Isobel now to cover organization analysis.
Great. Thank you, Finn. I should also say at this point that if you have any questions throughout this presentation, I believe we have the option to enter questions into the sign-up page. Is that correct, Finn?
Isobel. I had forgotten to mention that at the start. I think most of you have been on our webinars before, so there's a Q&A section at the bottom, just underneath the live video, and you can submit your questions there. I think maybe when we're finished the deck, I'll just go through how to do that as well, so people can pop in a few questions. Thanks, Izzy.
Super, thanks, Finn. So the next stage is transformation and organizational analysis. This is really important, but it's a fairly straightforward process. So user analysis means looking at the breakdown of roles in the organization and how the change will affect each of these different groups. So for example, the change move to Google Apps will impact an administrator who's largely desk-based, quite differently to a director who might be out and about and using mobile devices as well as being at their desk as well. So it's important to look at those different groups, look at how they will use the product, and see how you can best support them through the change. User readiness surveys allow us to assess individuals' understanding of the upcoming change and the reasoning behind it, to make sure that they're comfortable with it and they're positive about it, and also to gauge their current knowledge in relation to Google Apps, which can guide communications and training, the amount of training needed and at what level it should be pitched at. It's also a really great idea at this point to benchmark metrics before the project starts. And that means that efficiencies and improvements in processes and collaboration can be measured. So again, think back to Kotter and the value of communicating those wins. So you need to be able to measure them and be able to recognize them and then communicate them to your users. So here's a really simple example of an answer to a user readiness survey. It can be very straightforward, but for example, here we can see that the vast majority of respondents are already familiar with Gmail. So that can help because you're trying to sell them a product that they're already using, as they're using it maybe in their personal life, and here they can apply it to their work life and can see how it might make their life easier. And it might also guide the training that you don't need to start right at the beginning for the vast majority of the users there.
Yeah, the organization analysis always helps myself and Isobel in terms of breaking users up into different groups, because you might have, as Izzy said, more advanced users, and maybe those ones who've said no, they're might need a crash course in Gmail, whereas the other users, as you say, have already are already familiar with the product.
Mm. And here we can see part of an impact analysis. So here this survey responses are showing that 65% of respondents here feel that they're able to complete their work more quickly and efficiently using Google Apps. 42% are more engaged with their work, and so on. And again, that's something that gives you really great information to make sure that the change process has been working well, has been going effectively, to guide any future training needs, but also to communicate how effective the move to Google Apps has been. So Fintan mentioned transformation labs earlier on. Transformation labs are used to identify how Google Apps can be used to improve and reimagine business processes to inspire innovation. So they can be used really early on in the change process to help guide communication, training and support to make it as relevant and effective as possible. But they're also a great tool to use at any time to see how Google Apps can continue to support and drive efficient and convenient ways of working. So the workshops begin with examples to inspire and spark creative thinking. They're followed then by facilitated brainstorming to explore processes and look at how Google Apps could be used to improve them. Prototyping different solutions follows to delve deeper into what could work. And finally, a roadmap is planned for how to make these a reality. So transformation labs, they can be really great, and especially if your organization's been using Google Apps for a long time, they can be a really effective tool for kickstarting new innovations.
Great, thanks very much for that, Iz. So I'm going to cover communication now, and I think when we were talking about change and change management, communication is obviously a huge part of that, communicating with our users and early, as Isobel mentioned as well. And there is no such thing as over communication, particularly when it comes to employees within an organization. They say that a marketing message, whether it's internal or external, must be marketed to someone 7 times before they fully engage with that message. So if we just think about that, sending out an email isn't going to really, be enough. And I think when we think about ourselves, we all suffer from information overload every single day. So a consideration you need to think about is, how are you going to make your project stand out and capture people's attention in terms of that information overload? And I think particularly thinking about the idea of maybe a project brand can be a good idea, or maybe, as I'd mentioned earlier, bringing it into a larger transformation initiative. So some organizations like the idea of maybe associating it with the Google brand. Google actually recommend sending out some sort of announcement. Obviously, email is going to be your main form of communication, but some sort of announcement at least 3 months before your global go live. Now, for small organizations, obviously the timescales tend to be less, but certainly for a large, 1,000+ organization, we'd recommend at least kind of 3 months before. So over this time period, you're going to have multiple channels that you're going to be using, and it's important for you to kind of evaluate with your organization what channels are open to you. So examples might be giving talking points for meetings and meeting material. So again, for your executives, and Isobel mentioned this earlier, about reducing that barrier. So you want to be to make it easy for your executives and your sponsors to talk about the project. So it's important to give them that information. Going Google posters, I'm going to be showing you some of these later on from some of our own customers. I think some of which might be on today. And excuse me. And the posters can be a fantastic way of communicating with staff, because again, with the email overload, an email can be ignored, but having a poster up is very, very effective. And again, you'll see this when you see some of the posters. And it can be great to kind of combine these. If you do your announcement email and the announcement is made maybe in an all-staff company meeting, and then the posters go up kind of all on the same day, the impact of that can be fantastic. So you've done 3 of your 7 at least, so you're almost halfway there. And then maybe if your company has some sort of internal group, perhaps a Google Plus page or a Google site, that can be a fantastic way of getting the information out as well, if there's somewhere where employees go for general company information. a Go in Google video. Google have some template videos here that you can use to share the experience of Google Apps and what it's like to go Google. But also, I know some organizations have done stuff like gotten employees to maybe design up posters as part of a competition, or indeed do a little Go in Google video. And again, that's just about getting employee involvement, giving them ownership over the project, and obviously they're then less likely to potentially resist change. And then finally, some sort of Go in Google site template, which again I'm going to show you an example of later, which is fantastic for training, but also can be used as sort of the go-to place for all of the announcements around Google and around the Google project. I think in terms of things you need to think about, it's very much, as I said, thinking what channels are available to you within your organization. Perhaps you don't have some of these, you don't have a newsletter, or you don't have meetings. So it's important to think about the communication channels and see what's available in your organization, and to build out your communication plan, which will involve all of the marketing and communication activities. And also to think about little things like, you know, are we going to need to translate some of our documentation because we have people in multiple countries in different languages? And also simple things like who's going to put up the posters in different locations. So those little logistical things obviously become very important when it gets down to it. So just a couple of examples here of posters. On the left-hand side here, we have Omniplex Cinemas, a customer of ours in Ireland, who's sort of an announcement style poster. And then we have on the right-hand side, Cartoon Student, who I believe were on this morning. Shout out to you guys. And this is more of an informational-based poster. So as we can see here, it's more sort of why are we going Google, early login is important, and what's happening with your data, things like that. And these are fantastic styles of posters to have kind of side by side. So one is very much catching the person's attention, and then the other one is giving that more detailed or granular information. And then finally, an example of a Google training site, and this particular one is public. This is on learn.googleapps.com. You can go there yourself. Fantastic resources for communicating with users about the switch. There's some poster templates, there's Google icons, change management guides, Go in Google videos, and there's much more. I didn't have enough space here on the slide to show it all. But a fantastic resource for your users, and just giving them that place to go for information. And there is a template that you can sort of change yourself and then add in your own logos and things like that, and make it your own a little bit, which is good. I'm going to hand back to Isobel now for training.
Thanks, Fintan. So we know that users need skills and resources to be able to adapt to any sort of organisational change, and obviously Go in Google is no exception to this. So training is an essential part of any change management process. So the first step is a needs analysis to establish the most appropriate form of training for each user group. And there are lots of different options for providing training in Google Apps. So for example, looking at self-paced training, there are things like the Google Apps user guides, the Google Learning sites like Fintan just showed, Google training videos. And you can also develop targeted training documentation for specific users. So if you have someone in an accounts team who needs to do a specific task, it's very straightforward to pull together specific documentation for them that will show them how to do that. Then there's also facilitated training. And this can be the more traditional classroom-based group training. It could be one-to-one personalised training, which is something that we'd recommend for people like directors of an organisation who might not feel comfortable sitting in a classroom-based setting with their employees. Then it doesn't have to be face-to-face either. There's the option of webinars like this one, Hangouts, and live demos. And I think, Fintan, you've used these very successfully with some of your clients before.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Hangout on Air, I mean, as people can see from obviously being on one this morning, it's a fantastic way to distribute information, and particularly training. We used this before with some retail customers a year or so ago, and they had a couple of hundred stores throughout the UK. And it was very difficult to kind of, you know, organize training for all of the employees and the managers within those stores. And so we just did a Hangout on Air. You know, you can do the Hangout on Air and sort of share it, but share it privately, if that makes sense. So just within the organization, it's not public. And then obviously afterwards, the recording is there on YouTube, and again on a private link. So yeah, very, very valuable. way of just getting that information out. And we did that along with targeted training documents, training videos, learning sites, and that whole sort of, as you say, holistic approach to the training. So.
Okay, so then training and support doesn't just end with a go live with a deployment. It should be something that's ongoing. So change management isn't just a one-off process, and training really shouldn't be either. So refresher trainings, ongoing tips and tricks can really help make the most of a move to Google Apps. So things like tip of the week emails that give little hints and tips, or monthly newsletters, they can really help users to learn new tricks once they're more familiar with the Google for Work products. And of course, not forgetting the Apps Show with John and Debbie, which is a fantastic resource for ongoing learning. It's produced by Google and it's available on YouTube. And if you're having a bad day, John and Debbie can't help but perk you up, I think, with their enthusiasm for Google products.
Yeah, the ever bubbly John and Debbie. They're extremely enthusiastic about life in general. Yeah. I know a good few of our customers actually have started to share these videos, because I think people engage with videos. You know, when we think about ourselves, we're looking through our Twitter feeds or Facebook feeds, we tend to stop when we see a video. So I think employees are probably more likely to kind of play a 1 minute or 2 minute video with a tip in it. And John and Debbie are great because it cuts away and they do proper demos of the of what they're talking about. And they do one every single week, I think, don't they?
Yeah, they run different series. So really worth checking out.
So finally on resources, as Isobel said, the tips and tricks is a fantastic one, and John and Debbie, I'd recommend checking that out. Just to let people know, we will send links out to all of you who've signed up and who are on the webinar this morning, so don't worry about that. But I wanted to mention a couple of other resources. So Synergize is a fantastic product. It's a Google Apps training product. But what's different about it is it's what's called a contextual gadget. And it's a little Chrome add-on you install. Very, very good value. I think it's about $10 per user per year. So definitely worthwhile. And it gives users training within their Google environment. So within my Gmail, if I come across something I have a question on, I can just ask Synergize, and this little voice will come up and he will bring me through a personalized training session based on whatever I've asked. So it's very, very valuable, and it goes across the whole product, Google Mail and Docs and sites and everything. So definitely worth checking out. Better Cloud, some of you might remember this from previous webinars. Better Cloud is a IT admin tool for Google Apps. But it's hugely valuable for sort of getting an overview of how your change management is working. So Isobel was talking about that organizational analysis. Then you sort of need to benchmark things and see how you're progressing. And so Better Cloud can be very valuable for sort of digging into your users and seeing even simple things like have all of your users logged in before your go live day? Are you going to be getting loads of people going, what's my password? Simple things like that. And then down the bottom right hand corner here, this little fella, this is the Google Guru. Some of you might recognize him. It's a website also run by Better Cloud, although they do run them kind of completely separately. And it's a fantastic resource for Google Apps training. I would recommend checking it out. They do online tutorial videos and tips and tricks and things like that. Kind of similar to the John and Debbie thing. I don't know if it's weekly, but the amount of content that's on there now, it's definitely worth checking out. And then over on the right hand side here, we have Google's Going Google Guide. And last year they did this full change management document that they put together, and it was all their experiences of doing thousands and thousands of Google Apps deployments across the world, and putting all that knowledge together into a sort of single document. And it is 100 or so pages, but some bedtime reading for you change management gurus out there. And it's hugely valuable if you are considering going Google. And I think there's a section for sort of SMBs, and then a more in-depth one for enterprise customers. And then the last one I have here is obviously a Google Apps partner like ourselves or Educative, where we can help you with this training and change management process or transformation lab process. And it's something we're doing with a lot of our customers now, where they, as I said, they've been using Google Apps for the last 3 or 4 years, and they're coming back and saying, how can you help us maybe engage with the Google product more and leverage more from the investment that we've actually already made. So I just want to finish up by saying thanks very much to Isobel for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me here, Fenton.
No worries. We appreciated your talents and skills. And I really appreciate all of you coming on and viewing the webinar and joining us. I know there are several of you, as I said, who are regulars now on our little broadcasts.